In this book, a really important moment comes when the guy talks about the power a good instructor has and the devastating power of a bad instructor. Hey, what's up? I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV, and every week I put out videos on the martial arts, training, philosophy, technique, that sort of thing. This time we're talking about something that I read in this book that really kind of stood out among actually many things that have stood out in this book. But first, if you're new to the channel, this is the kind of thing I do. This is what you can expect. And so if you like this sort of thing, be sure to subscribe. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like, and let's get started talking about instructors and the power they hold. So I want to start off talking about this book, Violence of Mind by Varg Freeborn. This book was given to me by a really good friend of mine after we've had some really good conversations about what it means to train for violence. This friend of mine has had different experiences both in military, currently in law enforcement, that have led him to feel certain ways about things. And currently he's training with me, and so we have had good opportunities to talk about this stuff. And this was a book that he gave to me to read, particularly when we were talking about kata, and there's a section in here on kata-based training versus different types of training and why this guy thinks kata-based training isn't a good fit. Maybe a topic for another video. So first off, who is Varg Freeborn anyway? Varg Freeborn, he's a fitness coach. That sounds weird when you put that first, but that's actually the first thing listed here. But more importantly, he's a violence educator and a lethal force instructor. And along his long line of experience, I mean, the guy was dealing with violence, real violence, as young as 6 years old, where he was almost murdered. And he goes into some of that in this book, but he actually doesn't go into a lot of it. He really didn't want this book to be about that, about, well, here's all this thing, look at me. Instead, he's just going, hey, because of these experiences that I've had, I think this stuff's really important, and we need to pay attention, and we're not always paying attention in the right place. And I appreciate the fact that he's not trying to draw attention to himself, but more importantly, just trying to draw attention to the topic. Throughout the book, he talks a lot about physical violence as well as firearms training and that kind of thing, because firearms are so prevalent in both the use of violence as well as the reaction to violence. So he's talking a little bit about both things. So anyway, if you have this book, reading from page 133, this is the section where he's talking about tips on choosing instructors and schools. If you don't have this book, I really recommend it. I've got links down below for you to pick up a copy. If you get the book through that link, it actually helps support the channel, so that's awesome too. Appreciate that. Anyway, here we go. The self-defense industry and its subsequent categories of martial arts and gunfighting are full of experts who have never done the thing that they are experts in. The problem is created and compounded by the fact that the students themselves cannot know what they do not know yet. The lack of the instructor's experience creates gaps in the information that is taught. These gaps are not always apparent, and the student ends up walking away with an incomplete information that they do not know is incomplete. Often that instructor started out as one of those students and is still not aware that his information has a huge gap in it. As the student, you will actually believe you received thorough, reliable information that has prepared you for serious situations. You believe this because you had no prior frame of reference by which to judge that information. You simply are not experienced. This really hit home for me, because I've thought about this a lot. When you don't know what you don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you have run into this. If you train, you've had times where you wonder, hey, can I really know what I'm doing if I don't get into a fight, or I don't have situations where this stuff is happening? And that's a complicated thing to question, because on the one hand, there is no replacement for actually experiencing violence and knowing what this stuff is like in any capacity. People who work jobs where they have to deal with people, security jobs, bodyguard jobs, bouncer jobs, law enforcement, military, all that stuff, they end up with different types of experience when it comes to different types of violence. On the other hand, especially if you're not doing it through work, going out and seeking those situations, man, that's really not the best choice. Because when you go out there and do that, one, if your first instinct, your ethical compass is pointing you towards not creating situations like that, especially if you're in the karate world and you follow that karate ni sentenashi, which we talked about before, link down below, then you know that the sentiment behind that is that you don't go create a situation. You actually may strike first, but you don't go create bad situations. Second, you're also entering yourself into a dangerous place. For me, I've got a family, I've got people who care about me. If If I were to go do stuff like that just by choice, just to gain that experience, my family, the people who care about me, might not have a me anymore. Putting yourself into a dangerous situation is dangerous. That's just what it is. Well, so then how do you reconcile the fact that if you don't have that experience, which I don't personally have that. I was never in the military. I don't work law enforcement. I've not been a bouncer or anything like that. Have trained for many years, have explored different areas of the martial arts, and am still exploring different areas of the martial arts. So how do I reconcile the fact that I haven't had this experience? I don't have experience with these situations. Freeborn goes on to say something about people who don't. He says, another important characteristic of a good teacher is that they will be avid students themselves. Oftentimes, this is the only correction of the problem of incomplete information. That is, to learn what experience teaches by proxy. When you spend time under the tutelage of someone who has been there and done that, who is grounded in the realities of what real violence does to your life, you can begin to get a strong sense of what is important and what is not. That's the tact I've taken. That's the direction that I have gone is, if you don't have those experiences, then you should be hungry to learn about them if you're gonna go try to teach somebody or multiple somebodies. Because the only way to truly prepare other people for that stuff is to continue to seek that stuff. And if you're not gonna seek it through experience, or don't have the opportunity to seek it through experience, then you've really gotta be hungry to learn from somebody who has that experience. You've gotta learn what they have to do. You've gotta validate what you know through those experiences that they have, by proxy, as he put it. I think that's incredibly important, because without that validation process, you can spend a lot of time going the completely wrong direction. You are what you train. That's what you train is what you'll do. Archilochus, right, says you don't rise to the level of your expectation, you fall to the level of your training. That's a huge thing to think about. A good friend of mine once said while we were training, he said, you can get really good at something that will get you really dead. And that always stuck with me too. The whole point is, if you're gonna dedicate this much time to training and you think that the reason you're doing it is to become prepared for violence. And there's a lot of different reasons to train, so keep that in mind. If that's not your reason for training, this is somewhat irrelevant, right? It's not necessarily important. You need to make sure that the things that you're doing are in alignment with that. But for me, my goal is self-protection, protection of others that mean a lot to me. And now that I teach, it's really important that my focus includes making sure that I'm preparing other people for the same thing. Personally, I lay awake at night thinking about the fact that if I teach people wrong, if I skip things that aren't important, and I leave things out, or I don't go hunt down this knowledge, that I can prepare a lot of people to enter into situations and get themselves really hurt or killed or whatever because they weren't prepared. And I still have to reconcile that for me, because I can train like crazy as much as I want, but that doesn't mean that they are prepared no matter what I do, right? There's still an onus on them to train and become prepared themselves. All I can do is guide that. But outside of that, I gotta make sure that I'm guiding it from the right direction. And that's a huge, huge component. And that's why reading stuff like this is really huge. That's why working with people like the guy who gave me this book is really important. And there's a number of people in my life that kind of fit that category of, hey, I've been there, I've done that stuff, what's going on? What's that like? What do you need to prepare for? What is important? What isn't important? And how do you structure your material and your curriculum to follow that? So I think that's really huge when he says that lack of experience creates gaps in training, but more importantly, gaps that you might not be aware of. Then that second level, that level of people training below that person, don't even realize there's a gap there. Then their gap becomes larger because the things that they don't know already, you naturally have gaps in your training. You do, you just will. All you can do is hope to fill those gaps, to keep filling those gaps. And then truly at the end of the day, as an instructor, all you can do is hope that somebody picks up where you left off. For me, all I'm hoping to do is prepare people to be where I'm at in my study. Just to get what I got, give that to them, and let them continue that work. Which means I need to fill as many gaps as I can. But I will have gaps. And the people who go on after me will need to work to fill the gaps that they have. They'll have their own, but they'll also have inherited the gaps that I had. And that's a really big thing. So now they've got two gaps. They've got their own gaps, they've got my gaps. So now that small gap became a big gap. If you don't realize those gaps are there, you're never gonna be able to fill them because you're never gonna look for it. So I think it's really important that you recognize there are gaps in your training. Let me say that again. There are gaps in your training. What those gaps are, how significant or serious they are, depends. It's gonna vary. But they exist. And I feel like if you especially are putting yourself in a place where you're responsible for somebody's life, somebody is coming to you with the idea that what you are giving them is preparing them to protect themselves, to preserve themselves, then you really have to make sure that you're spending time truly trying to fill those gaps as best you can. Anyway, that's it for today. Go read this book. Go read some of the other books I've been talking about. I've been enjoying this series of talking about things that I'm reading in these different books and going. So if you got some great books, please recommend them to me. There's plenty of things out there I know that I don't know about. So tell me about it so I can go read some of these great things. If there's been stuff that has been really impactful to you and your training and your life, hit me up, hit those comments and tell me about it. I'm always looking for the next thing to study and learn more from. In the meantime, if you like this video, hit that like, subscribe to the channel. We'll keep doing more stuff like this. But most importantly, get back on the mat, keep training, keep striving for your goals, and I'll catch you in the next one.